Welcome, my friend, to the On the Blue Line podcast for law enforcement. I am your host, Wayne Mulder. This is the podcast that helps law enforcement officers overcome the mental health toll of the profession to be better leaders and protectors on and off the job. This week in the interview room, I sit down with retired Sergeant Betsy Smith. You may not need any introduction, but she's the spokeswoman for the National Police Association. We discuss what it's like being a female in law enforcement, antelope hunting in Wyoming, what it's like discussing policing matters with media on all sides of the political aisle, and what she is doing to ensure that the cop's voice, our point of view, is what is being brought to the national media. Another great episode of the On the Blue Line podcast. Well, it starts now. If you break the law, if you decide to do this, we're going to hold you responsible.
You are the only good thing in someone's worst day. That is a privilege for a police officer.
At the very least, you could honor the sacrifices of police officers and their families.
We have the ability to save the Republic. Welcome. Thank you so much for coming back and listening. And yes, things are going to get better. I love the new anthem, and it really is the heart of everything I'm trying to do here. So no matter how negative or depressing what I talk about from week to week is, I assure you things are going to get better. And how do I know that? Wayne, how do you know they're going to get better? Well, because I have faith in you. I know you and I are going to stand up and we're going to do this. So that is why I can be so optimistic about it. Most active on Twitter or X, whatever you want to call it, at On the Blue Line and the number 1. Be sure to join me there. And if you would, we're also on all the other social media at On the Blue Line podcast. However, I am most active on Twitter. You will see some of my snarky comments. I try to be a little bit entertaining, and yet I also try to be informative. So at On the Blue Line and the number 1, and most active on there. And then the other big favor, if you would, if you are listening to this content, if you enjoy this content, we want you to be honest, but a 5-star review is huge. So if you'd hit 5 stars, especially on iTunes, it makes a big difference, or Apple Podcast, I guess is what it's called now, but it would make a big difference in helping us out. So thank you very much. So let's get straight to it. Let's talk about this week's guest. It's Sergeant Betsy Brantner Smith, retired 29-year veteran of a large metropolitan police department in the Chicago suburbs, where she began as a dispatcher at the age of 17 and then moved on into law enforcement career. She talks all about it in this podcast, and I think you're going to enjoy all the different positions and things that she's learned. And she does speak specifically to females in law enforcement. I think you're going to enjoy that part as well, because that isn't really a topic that I've discussed a lot on here, because needless to say, I'm not an expert in it. She's been a law enforcement trainer for over 20 years, content expert and senior instructor for Caliber Press, the Street Survival Seminar. She also created Street Survival for Women seminar. She's a popular keynote speaker at all sorts of events from across the country, and she's been in all sorts of government and civilian publications to include Police One, lawofficer.com, civilian firearms magazines. On and on it goes. She is a media analyst, and she's currently the spokesperson for the National Police Association. She's a sought-after law enforcement analyst on radio, television, print. She's been on all of them. If you just do a search, you'll find her all over the place. But she does a great job, and she is a creator of the only course of its kind for women in law enforcement called the Winning Mind for Women, and is the owner of Winning Mind LLC. And her and her husband, Dave, who you'll get to meet in another week, develop and instruct cutting-edge courses and travel extensively to get their message out. What she's doing, the National Police Association isn't for police per se, even though it benefits all of us. It's for the public. And Betsy does just a phenomenal job. She's got a great personality, an infectious smile, and she does a really great job of getting the message of what matters to law enforcement out to the public when she analyzes different events. So enough from me. It's time to hear from this week's guest, Betsy Smith. Well, Betsy, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be able to do this.
Yes. Well, you are by far the media expert, but we'll get into that here in a minute. I'm so happy we get the opportunity to sit here and have a conversation. Let me start with you, as I do with everybody. It's my get to know you questions. Coffee or tea?
Oh, coffee. Mainline. I would inject it if I could. Cannot function without it.
I am with you there 100%. So I'm assuming, is it black coffee then?
No, I'm kind of a weenie. I gotta have my heavy cream in it.
Okay, well, that's okay. Yeah, so not lots of sugar, just the heavy cream.
No sugar.
Where's your favorite place to have that drink of coffee?
Wow, I would say outside of my RV with my 3 dogs and my husband on a camping trip.
I'm sure that would be the perfect spot. And speaking of camping, do you have a best or worst travel story?
Oh Lord. I have traveled so much. Let me say this. I was traveling so much when I was a working street sergeant. I was also traveling full time, doing law enforcement training around the country. And I got to the point where I woke up one morning in a hotel and I had to look at the phone on the nightstand next to me to determine what city I was in.
That's a lot of traveling. What was that training role? What were you trained? I know I'm kind of jumping off target here already, but what was that training role then?
Sure. So I have been a national level trainer for several decades, but at one point in my career into the 2000s, I was the only and still am the only female to ever teach the street survival seminar at that time by Caliber Press. And so we traveled throughout the country. We also went to Macedonia and Bulgaria to teach it. And so, yeah, I was doing that full time, and I was a full-time patrol sergeant as well,
wow.
And a mom and a wife.
What a great opportunity, though.
It was amazing.
So let me ask you one of my last of these get to know you questions. What is your favorite modern nonfiction book?
My favorite modern nonfiction book. Well, okay, so this is probably what every Christian says, but it's the Bible. And the older I get, the more profound it becomes. And recently, in the last couple of years, I've started studying the historical nature of the Bible, and I've learned that it's all provable, which, a lot of people believe that the Bible is just a bunch of stories and parables to make people behave. And in reality, it's all true, which makes it a fascinating nonfiction book.
I would agree with you 100%. It is. I was very fortunate to grow up in the church, and I went to a school where one of the big things they did was teach the historical relevance of it as well. So it wasn't, hey, just read the Bible. It was, here's the stories that were going on that we know from just common literature that we know were happening at the same time that this story is. And then, like you said, you can start piecing it together and really, in many ways become a forensic, take a forensic account of what actually occurred.
Yeah, there's archaeology, there's history, right. There's science, there's astronomy. It's amazing.
Yeah. No, it's powerful. I love that answer. So my last of these, what is that place that brings you the most peace? With that favorite spot to just stop, breathe, and enjoy life?
Wow, I would have to say there's a little town in Wyoming called Wheatland, Wyoming. And we own a little piece of property there, but I have some amazing friends there. And it's where I first learned how to hunt. And we go there every year and do some antelope hunting and some bird hunting. And Wyoming is such a huge place.
Yes. And I love Wyoming.
And you look at the mountains and you look at the cattle and the deer and the antelope. Wow, sounds like a song. And just on the 4-wheeler with my dogs, looking at Laramie Peak, I feel tiny, but so connected and so peaceful.
Yeah, I can imagine. I love the mountains. Antelope hunting. That has got to be with those things are so skittish. I mean, you've pretty much got to be talking like a rifle, right? From quite a distance. Is that essentially antelope hunting? Because I've yet to hunt in the West. I'm a Midwest boy, so I'm from Michigan originally. So that's my world, but I love the West, and I've been out there many times. But yeah, I can't even imagine hunting those little critters the way they.
Oh, it's amazing. They're so beautiful to watch. And again, I'm an Illinois girl, so of course, we had shotgun deer hunting. But my husband first took me to Wyoming, and the antelope. Never saw anything like an antelope before in my life, except in the movies, and they're amazing to watch. And you can't stalk them, and you really can't just sit and wait for them like you do a deer. You just have to have incredible timing and incredible luck. And you use a rifle. My round I use a 7 Mauser and some good optics. And I like to say, because I love animals so much, I want them to just be munching on grass 1 second and be in antelope heaven the next, and not know what hit them. I don't ever want them to suffer. Absolutely. And they are so delicious. So really? Yeah. Oh, incredible. Yeah.
All right. I will have to try this sometime. It's on my list. Well, from there, let's kind of go into we've hit on a couple highlights of your story, but let's go a little bit through your origin story, because we're also a farm girl, correct? And then end up working at a metropolitan agency. Like, how does that all come together?
So I am an Illinois farm girl, and raised about 2.5 hours outside of Chicago, very rural area. Yeah. And when I was, I had told my parents I wanted to be a cop from the time I was in about junior high. So I am 63 years old. So I graduated high school in 1977. So in 76, my dad was on the merit commission of our county sheriff's department. And the sheriff there said, well, if she wants to be a cop, because women weren't cops back then. Right. And he said, let's see if how she does as a dispatcher. We'll see if she really likes it. So they tried everything to scare me, gross me out, showed me all the crime scene photos, all of that in my rural sheriff's department. And so this whole second half of my senior year, I worked the 4 to 12 shift, 4 p.m. to midnight. As a dispatcher. Then I went to college. I dispatched for a couple of years in college. And then 2 weeks out of college, I became a police officer in the Chicago suburbs. So it was a quick 5 years. And I discovered that I absolutely loved police work.
Wow. That had to be something, because even though I know Chicago's in the news a lot these days, but even back then, Chicago has always been a city that has kept itself in the news. So, from organized crime to, because I'm from Michigan, but I grew up in Indiana. So from Fort Wayne. Oh. So the other side of the cornfields and soybeans. Yeah. So I'm somewhat familiar with that area. I had a lot of friends that actually went to school in Hammond, Indiana. So not too far out of that area. And it has always been an issue. So I'm just kind of curious. That had to be shocking going from the farm to the city. Gosh.
I have to tell you that when I moved there, I went to college in the country in the middle of the state. So I get to the Chicago suburbs, and it was the fastest growing suburb in Chicago. And I went to the police academy in Cook County, Illinois, just outside of the Chicago city limits. And it was absolute culture shock. I had never seen. I hadn't done much interstate driving. I just really was unfamiliar with city life. So I'm in the police academy, and it was shocking. Chicago had a lot of crime. And after the academy into the 80s, I got put on a statewide task force, and I did a lot of work in the city of Chicago. And in the 80s, of course, crack cocaine, lots of powder cocaine. Yeah. I spent 4 years undercover. And again, there just weren't many women doing what we were doing. And so being the only female undercover, I was getting loaned out to, all these different agencies, federal agencies. I actually worked in 3 different states. And I learned a whole lot about the city of Chicago, about firearms, about crime. It was an amazing experience for a farm kid from Northern Illinois.
I'm certain. That's awesome. So I always typically ask, because everyone, just saying you work in law enforcement, as you know, everybody can have completely different experiences, and you've touched on some of them. But later in your career, did you kind of specialize? Was it more in the training side? Was it more, because I know you also did some stuff in like crisis intervention and so forth. What kind of road did you take through your law enforcement journey?
Training really wasn't my first love. I was a real action junkie. And so after spending just a couple of years on patrol, then I went into investigations, and I did everything: paper crimes, property crimes, all that, working on homicides. And then I did the undercover thing. And that's where I really honed my tactics. I really and learned not how to qualify, but how to win a gunfight. And I actually, in 1985, when I started in narcotics, I went to my first street survival seminar taught by a guy named Dave Smith, JD Buck Savage for a lot of our officers. And so I really learned that there were some things that I really needed to understand about tactics and my tools and my firearms. When I left narcotics after 4 years, I thought the best way to prepare myself for supervision was to become a field training officer. So I went to field training school, and it's there I really started to get interested in the brain and the physiology of training. And I trained a ton of recruits, went back into detectives, got promoted, and again, as a supervisor, got very interested in training, started doing training of my own and writing, not so much in my agency, but outside of my agency. And it just kind of took off from there. And I've always found that writing and training go hand in hand, because as a writer, you've got to really learn and continue to keep up. And that lends itself to being a really good current trainer.
And I would even argue or agree with that, and then add to it that you also have to be able to break things down in the writing process, which is very important in the training process, is that ability to break it down into small actionable steps.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And that's always been one of my pieces of advice to new trainers, that if you've got a training class and you want to get the word out there, turn it into an article. Literally sit down with your presentation and block it out. And vice versa. If you've written an article and you want to do training on that topic, you just take that article and turn it into a presentation block by block. So they really do go hand in hand.
Yeah, no, that's good. So from here, I want to go down a different road real quick, because I looked at a lot. You've written so many articles. I couldn't read them all prepping for this show. You've written a few, we'll just say. But something I can't really speak to. So when I started this podcast, I started it really with empowering law enforcement officers in their personal lives. And something obviously I can't really speak to is women in law enforcement. And that is something that you write about quite a bit. I've looked at some of your articles, like what advice would you give to a female rookie, 3 safety concerns for female cops, et cetera, and so on. My question would be, obviously, the world has changed since the 80s, 90s, and I believe it was 2009 when you retired. But that being said, for all the changes, it's still different and still a struggle, because I hear the feedback from a lot of the female listeners that I have, plus females that I work with. So can you speak to that a little bit, being a female in law enforcement, and then maybe just some considerations and so forth as well?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I entered the police academy in January of 1981. And there were 4 women that started on Monday. And by Friday, I was the only woman left. I mean, wow. We just were, excuse me, we were hazed and we were abused. I mean, it's just how it was. And, you could do one of 2 things. You could quit and go do something else, or you could try and tough it out. There really wasn't, back then, nobody was suing anybody. And so I learned how to do my job and deal with, yes, there was harassment. Yes, there was discrimination, all of that. So, yeah, I mean, in the 80s, our motto as women was to work twice as hard and get half as much credit. And that's what we did. I started studying in the late 80s when I became a field training officer, and I saw the differences between my female recruits and my male recruits. I thought, well, this is something I better pay attention to. So I started to study the brain. I studied physiology. I saw how we shoot different, how we fight different. Most women cops, and you can ask this of your female colleagues, and you've probably seen it, is that most women cops will tell you that they have gotten countless numbers of people, men, into a set of handcuffs and into the back of their patrol car without hardly having to touch them.
Yep.
Because we do things differently. We there's a lot of talk in modern policing now of de-escalation. Women are natural de-escalators, especially when we're dealing with a man. It's different when it's woman to woman, just like it's different when it's man to man. And so we don't teach that stuff. We talk about everybody's equal, everybody's the same, and frankly, we do ourselves a disservice. So to answer your question, is it still different for women? Partially, yes. There's always going to be probably more men than women in the street part of law enforcement, and is this because law enforcement is a lousy career for women? Absolutely not. But there's really only a certain part of the female population that is attracted to this job. And believe me, I have studied this. I have talked to the media about this for the last 25 years. And I have had media ask, well, if we just did, I've had academics ask me too, if we just made law enforcement more family friendly, wouldn't more women be attracted to it? Basically, then if you do that, what you're saying is to men, oh, your parenting doesn't matter. We just have to uplift women as parents. You can't do that. So, there's just there's just certain men that are attracted to the law enforcement profession. There's just certain women that are attracted to it. And quite frankly, there's always going to be less women, but the women in this profession are amazing. And we have to continue to uplift them, just like we have to continue to uplift the men in this profession. We got to stop separating us out, but we need to learn the differences and train to them.
Yes, that's wonderful. And as a frontline supervisor, I've been fortunate to have squads that have, in fact, currently a squad that has several. In fact, there's more women than men on my current squad. And it's great because, like you said, especially when you get into things like de-escalation, behavioral health, and so forth, it's wonderful, but it also gives you a completely different mindset. Now, what's funny to me, and I don't know, maybe this is just a male-female thing, but a lot of them, I'll get complaints about working with other females. Like they would rather be on a squad with all guys. So I don't know what that is exactly, being a male. Maybe I just don't understand. But yeah, that is a common complaint I get from the females.
There's something called the queen bee syndrome. And, because that's something that there's always been this myth. And I've seen this for decades where, police administrators, especially if they're all men, try and put the women all together and hope that they will uplift each other. Well, it depends on the personality of the women. All women don't think alike, just like all men don't think alike. And I'm sure you've seen this in your agency where somebody will come to, and you might have even done it as a supervisor. You go to one of the women on your squad and you say, "So what do the women think about this?" And you do it perfectly, innocently, but all women don't think alike. But a lot of times we make that mistake. And so yeah, we need to treat everybody as individually. But I want to stress to the women out there in law enforcement, do your damnedest to uplift each other. Try not to be that queen bee. And if you're frustrated with a member of your agency that's also female, you don't think, she's not tough enough, she's not this, she's not that, then suck it up and mentor her and do what you can. I wrote an article a long time ago for officer.com about mentoring someone that you hate. It's easy to mentor someone you really like. Find that woman. I'm going to especially say this to the women listening. Find that woman on your agency or on a neighboring agency, if you're in a small department, that you just can't stand because of this and this and this and this. Become her mentor and guide her toward where you think she ought to be.
That's great advice for men and women alike. So I'm going to find that article and I'll be sure to link it up as well. One more question down this road, then I'm going to completely switch gears on you. But I want to ask one more question because you kind of brought it up. You mentioned the training when we talk about females and training, understanding the difference, what would be one thing you would highlight? Like if you could pick one, what would be like a priority that it's like, well, we're not there yet, we need to do this?
I think the biggest thing is the communication differences. And in fact, we have a class that we teach. In fact, I took it into the Pentagon until COVID. And we put it in all our classes, leadership, officer safety, all of that. And it's called The Truth About Gender Differences. And when it comes to communication, and we talk about the differences between how men and women communicate. If we could just understand that. I literally was in a meeting a couple hours ago, and there was two men, one who was my husband, and two women. And the woman, who's very high-powered woman in this meeting, is talking and talking and talking. My husband mutes his phone and looks at me and goes, "Oh, she's talking too much." Blah, blah. I go, "Honey, she's a woman." Because women have about 20,000 words a day we need to get out. Men have 5,000 to 7,000. So when we are in a meeting, we talk a lot. If we could just understand that one thing about each other, we would communicate a whole lot more effectively in the workplace and at home.
Wow. Yeah. And that is astonishing too, when you think about that fact. And then of course it leads to a lot of misunderstandings and complaining about each other.
Huge misunderstanding. There's a great book out there called Work With Me by John Gray and I have to think of the female author that wrote it, Barbara Annis maybe. And but it's called Work With Me, and it is the differences between men and women at work, and it'll change your life.
Okay,
everybody should go get that book. You probably get it used on Amazon. It's a few years old. You probably pay $5 for it. It's a fantastic book.
Well, then it's a must read. So I will be sure.
It is a must read.
I will be sure to find it and link that one up as well. So let's switch gears almost completely here and talk, well, or you can segue in between, because honestly, at some point you end up coming to the National Police Association, but I'm assuming there were some things that happened in between there. So if you want to walk us through that, you can, or we can go to what you're doing now with the National Police Association.
Well, sure. I had a great 29-year career, police career in the Chicago suburbs. And I had a ball. I mean, I did all kinds of different things, training, and I ran K9. I ran the crowd control bike team, and I ran the crisis intervention team, and I ran a patrol team. I ran animal control. I ran the crime prevention unit. I mean, I did all kinds of just tons of cool things. And so when I retired in 2009, at this point, I'm already a full-time trainer with the Street Survival Seminar. Plus, we were doing training on our own. I do officer survival training for women. I do it for everybody. I do it for dispatchers. We've developed some specific curriculum for dispatchers. And I was writing for all these different magazines and this and that. Well, my husband got me to move to Arizona, out of Illinois, out of the Midwest, to a place where it doesn't snow, Southern Arizona. Yeah. I couldn't be happier. And so we're just going along with our training career and writing career. And when the George Floyd situation happened, I was already doing a little bit of writing for the National Police Association, it's not an organization for cops to join. What it is it's a non-for-profit that brings attention to whatever anti-police efforts happen to be going on at the time, whether it's by activist groups, whether it's by even certain, parts of the, law enforcement community, by the media, things like that. And so we get involved in, we publish books, we write articles. We have a website, the nationalpolice.org. We file amicus briefs in different court cases. And but they didn't have a national spokesman. So right after George Floyd, there was a situation happening in California where there was a police department that these officers had to come to work and look at a Black Lives Matter mural where one of the letters was a depiction of Assata Shakur. If you know anything about her, she's a cop murderer. She's a convicted cop killer. These cops had to come to work every day and see her, this 32-foot high Assata Shakur picture in a Black Lives Matter mural. And so the head of the organization got a hold of me and said, well, you talked to the media about this. You've been on camera before, because I was with the Law Enforcement Television Network and then with the Police One Academy doing a lot of camera work. So I said, sure, I can do that. And so I was interviewed, and then another station reached out, another station, and he hired me. He said, I would like to be our national spokesman. I'm like, sure, I'll talk to anybody.
Yeah.
And so 2.5 years later, that's what I do for the National Police Association is I bring the cops' point of view into the national media.
I love that. And that makes more sense now. I was going to ask that with the National Police Association because some of the writings and stuff on there seemed aimed more at the general public than law enforcement. So that all actually makes a lot of sense at this point.
That's what we do. We do public service announcements. We have a podcast called it's a video podcast on Pluto and on the First TV, which is Bill O'Reilly's streaming network. And then it's on our YouTube page called the MPA Report, where we just interview just all kinds of different police leaders and citizens, and we cover all kinds of different issues. And we're just trying to get the public to understand that cop point of view. We're apolitical. We don't get involved in politics. I'll interview candidates, but we never, we don't say vote for this guy or vote for this woman. We just let people know how they can support law enforcement. We give out grants, we'll help an Explorer program get going, or buy a canine, a vest if the department can't afford it. And my role is just to speak for my brothers and sisters out there and talk about, whether it's tactically or emotionally, procedurally, and it can be tough. I mean, I've been on, and I do this internationally. I've been on where I've had Antifa activists call me a liar, and lots of arguments. I've been on Dr. Phil where it's getting real heated with an activist, and all kinds of stuff. So, but it's a pretty fun job.
Wow. Yeah, I haven't seen some of those yet, but a couple things. You do a fabulous job, and you have an infectious, beautiful smile, so that helps. But yeah, you do a fabulous job. And I watched a couple of the ones you were on with Fox Business, and so forth. But then I saw one where you were on Cheddar News, and you did a really good job, probably better than I would have done in that situation. So you did a great job answering the questions.
Thank you. Yeah, that Cheddar News hit I did, I had no idea what the topic was going to be. So sometimes they'll ask you to do one topic and then it goes live and it's a totally different topic. Sometimes I've been on, I've literally been in the virtual green room for Newsmax, listening to the president speak, and then they come right to me and ask me to react. And so it's pretty exciting.
I'm sure. Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah, and some of them I'd be a little nervous. Like some of these news organizations, I'd be a little nervous on what they were going to walk me into once the camera pans.
I've been walked into lots of things, and I just always try and do my best for my brothers and sisters, for street law enforcement is the people I love, the people I care about, and the people that we're trying to help the most. And of course the entire profession. But the cops that are doing the job are the people that are near and dear to our hearts.
Well, and it's obvious and it's appreciated. Let me ask your opinion on a couple things, because there's a couple topics you talk a lot about, and I'd be curious to hear your thoughts when we talk, because it is such a large thing that's discussed in the media, kind of came out of the whole defund the police movement and so forth. But when we talk about police reform, what are your thoughts on that terminology from the perspective of law enforcement? Because I'm one who believes that there are some changes and some things that need to be updated and move forward, but I'd be curious on your thoughts on this.
Well, sure. The problem with that term police reform is it has grown to mean keep cops from doing their jobs.
Yeah.
And or all cops are bad, and so we just have to stop what they're doing. It's just like criminal justice reform. To some people that means stopping people from going to jail or stopping people from going to trial. So can the law enforcement profession be better? Of course. And again, remember, I've been in the law enforcement profession since 1976. So I have seen reform. I have seen changes. And whether it's from an officer survival standpoint or a leadership standpoint or how we deal with the public. So yeah, can we always be improving? Absolutely. The problem with that term police reform is that in the last, really since about 2014, and especially since 2020, it has grown to mean stop cops from doing their job. And what we really need to do is put law enforcement back into policing, but the thing is we American law enforcement have been tasked with taking care of every social ill there is out there. And frankly, it's gotten worse in the last 2.5 years, where everybody wants us to be everything from, a psychologist and a babysitter. And we've got to be able to recognize every single drug that's out there and who's on it and how they're going to act and all that. It's become insurmountable. Right. The cop's primary job is public safety, and we need to be able to enforce the law. But I think one of the things our public doesn't understand is that when we do enforce the law, we're just the first piece of it, and we have taken prosecution out of policing, and that's why we have this horrific crime problem right now. When you talk about criminal justice reform, the bigger issue of police reform, again, we're deep prosecuting bad guys. We've stopped vilifying the villains, and we're just doing what? Vilifying cops. So yes. There's a lot that needs to happen, and we can continue to improve this profession, but they're just trying to stop us from the activists are just trying to stop us from doing their jobs. And now we see the result of that. We see the result of overreaching police reform, and we see the result of defunding the police. You know what would be so great when we talk about police reform? Wouldn't it be great if every cop in this country had a bachelor's degree? That'd be fantastic. But we can't even get cops. We can't get anybody to apply for this job, much less somebody who has spent 4 years in college preparing for this job. So the defund the police movement actually has pulled the rug out from under much of the police reform that we could have been doing.
Absolutely. Well, it's literally the opposite of what the statement should be. Because if you want all these things to happen, you need to fund them. That's the way this process works. So you've got to put money into it. If you're truly trying to improve something, the only way to do it is through increased funding. This whole defund thing is an oxymoron at best.
Well, and that's the thing. I get questions constantly by the media, and they ask this because they think I'm going to talk about how much I hate it. But they say, a lot of the activists want more social workers in law enforcement. How do you feel about that? And they're expecting me to say, hell no, we don't want social workers in law enforcement. And in reality, and I tell them this, is that in a perfect world, every patrol cop would be riding around with a full-time well-educated social worker sitting next to them. How great. I mean, think about that.
Yeah.
How much easier would your job be if you could turn next to you when you're going to your next violent domestic and have an MSW or an LCSW sitting next to you going, okay, how do you want to handle this? And, but no, you know what? Nobody wants to pay for that, because when you've got somebody with a master's degree sitting next to you in that patrol car, what are you going to have to pay them? And what else are you going to have to train them to be able to do, i.e. protect themselves? In fact, why don't we just say that every single police officer should have a master's degree in social work or psychology? How about that? Wouldn't that be great? Nobody wants to pay for it.
Yep. And then you have the flip side of that, because I'm very familiar with co-responder programs and offline. That's something we could talk about, but something I have a lot of experience in right now. And that one of the other issues is getting the people on that side of the house to want to do it. It's not as easy. I mean, they think that all these social workers want to come and ride around with cops all day, and that's not true either.
No, and they're not encouraged to see that side of things when they're in school.
Right.
And, if you talk about co-responders, I mean, that would be a perfect world.
Absolutely. It's a great system. It works well.
And this is the thing too. And obviously, this, but again, I got hired in 1980 in my little police department in 1980 in the suburbs. We already had 2 police social workers on staff. Police social workers have been around for decades and decades, and they're invaluable. But again, if you want more police social workers, you can't take millions and millions of dollars out of our police budgets to be able to do that. It's illogical.
Right. It's never going to work. Something you touched on there that I was leading to, I'm going somewhere with this. For simplicity, I'll just say the Soros-backed DAs. But the issue is these prosecutors, and we're seeing it in all these cities. And the only exceptions that I'm seeing is when you have strong governors like DeSantis that are willing to pull them out of there and say, you need to do your job. But is that a problem that can be fixed?
Well, for example, we just had Larry Krasner in Pennsylvania impeached in Philadelphia. And
yes.
Is it Philadelphia or Pittsburgh? Philadelphia, right? So he's one of those Soros installed DAs. You saw Chesa Boudin in San Francisco, another Soros installed DA who was recalled. So now they tried to recall George Gascon in LA County. That was unsuccessful. But that's what's going to happen. But here's the problem. It goes state to state. There's different laws, appropriately so, in the United States.
Right.
It's different, and this was why New York, if Lee Zeldin would have been elected as governor, he could have removed the Manhattan DA, who is just letting people walk in so many, for so many different crimes. So, now in Illinois, where I come from, it's different. The governor cannot remove the state's attorney, we come. So it depends. But that is one of the biggest problems we have in our criminal justice system right now. We can arrest every single bad guy in our town. But what people need to understand is we take that bad guy, we take that case against the bad guy, whether it's armed robbery or burglary or murder or whatever, and we hand that over to a district attorney or a state's attorney, a prosecutor. And they are the ones who present that case to the judge. They are the ones who make a lot of determinations about what happens to that case. A great example is the shooting we just had of the football players by a fellow teammate in Virginia.
Yes. That
shooter who killed, I believe it was 4 fellow students. He had been arrested for weapons offenses before. He had been charged with violent felonies. All of that got pled down by a prosecutor's office to some sort of misdemeanor with $100 fine and like 6 months of probation. And then he was able to go back, pass a background check inexplicably, and get another gun. So people need to understand that when you have a lax criminal justice system because of these George Soros installed prosecutors that we have in Chicago and Seattle and Portland and LA and Manhattan, and we could go on, combined with a governor who can't or won't do anything, then your crime is going to continue to rise. And you talked about Florida and what DeSantis did, removing a district attorney who wouldn't follow the law. Conversely, in Jacksonville, Florida, and that area, they have a prosecutor who is amazing, and she is a take no prisoners prosecutor, if you will. If you violate a gun law and commit a violent crime with a gun, you're gone, and you're going to spend significant time in prison. And she's taken Jacksonville, Florida, which used to be a pretty dangerous city, and she's making it safe again. That's what we need to do everywhere.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. And I'm hopeful. And I love what you said, because it really solves so many of these problems you hear in the media, which is kind of the world you're in a lot, is when it comes to the media world, and hear all these things. And one of the other ones, of course, is obviously the war on the Second Amendment. But if we would just, like you said, just go with the laws we have on the books and actually prosecute people, we wouldn't even have this conversation or need to have this conversation.
Well, and that's one of the things the National Police Association has been very much in the forefront about. We are the most Second Amendment supporting police organization in this country. We believe that our citizens should have the freedom to purchase, train with, and utilize legal firearms to protect themselves, because we know, and now more than ever, that there are not enough cops to be able to keep every single citizen safe. In fact, we've gotten involved in cases, for example, in Minneapolis, Minnesota, where we filed amicus briefs on behalf of the citizens who, because of their prosecutor and because of their attorney general, weren't getting the type of police service they deserved. So we filed on behalf of the citizens to get better police protection. And that's one of the other things we're doing, is we're being vocal about the Second Amendment. You know, people hear in the media all the time, oh, police officers, the police want more gun control. Police officers don't want more gun control. You'll hear from certain police leaders, primarily big city police chiefs, oh, we need more gun control. Right. We know more gun control isn't the answer, but they talk about it because that's what their mayors and boards want them to talk about. That's why sheriffs tend to be more Second Amendment friendly than do big city police chiefs. We don't need more gun laws. We need prosecutors that will use the gun laws we have to punish the people who commit gun crime.
Absolutely. In fact, I had a podcast that I do two shows. I do the interview show, and then I do something called Morning Roll Call. And about a month or so ago, I had on that monologue show, and the whole premise of it was, you are the first responder talking to citizens. And it's true, because even in the best case scenarios where you have a lot of law enforcement that get there, it can still be 5-10 minutes and things are over by the time we get there. So
as they say, when trouble is seconds away, police are minutes away. I mean, that's just the reality of the situation is, when you look at, whether it's workplace violence, school violence, whatever it is, armed, trained citizens can make a difference, not only in their own safety, but in the safety of their fellow citizens. We saw this, people won't remember it because it hardly got any coverage. But, a few months ago in Indianapolis, we had an armed trained citizen step in a mall shooting and stop it.
Yes,
and that's
within seconds.
Within seconds, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, that was phenomenal too, because the distance on the shots was better than typical.
Yeah, it was incredible.
Yeah, I've never seen that.
Cops couldn't shoot that well.
Exactly, I've never seen that with cops. So just a couple more questions for you. I kind of the elephant in the room with all of this, and it's something you talk about, is how obviously a lot of what we're talking about is how these issues have become political issues. But something you often say is that crime and safety should not be political issues. So how do we separate it? Speaking, kind of to my audience, is there a way to separate it? Like, what is the broader thoughts on this?
Well, I think what is going to have to happen is people on, both sides, or all sides, if you will, because there's there's the left, the right, there's the libertarians, there's the progressives, all of that. Everybody's going to have to admit, whether it's together or separately, that crime is a problem in the United States of America. And we have got to be realistic about, in other words, we have to be factual about who's committing crime and why they're committing it. We have to stop talking about, people are, for example, after a riot, people are looting because they can't feed their families, or people are doing carjackings because they're poor. I am so sick of hearing people on both sides say, well, if we got a handle on poverty, we would be getting a handle on crime. Just because you're poor doesn't mean you're going to be a criminal or you are a criminal. I know tens of thousands of poor people throughout my life who are not criminals. We have got to go back to being scientific. We have got to go back to understanding that being a criminal is a conscious choice.
Yeah.
And we have got to punish that conscious choice. We have got to vilify the villains and stop making excuses for them. And also, we've got to stop vilifying the good guys who are trying to stop crime. So none of that needs to be political. We just have to go back to being factual and realistic.
I love that. Amen is what I'll say to that, because it's so powerful, because how condescending is that, right? And we do it with other groups as well. It's not just this crime conversation where it's almost like we say, you can't do this because you're poor, you're going to commit crimes, or because you're of a certain ethnicity, because of certain situations, you're not going to have a driver's license or whatever.
Right. If you're poor, you're unable to go get your free, state ID. I mean, it's just ridiculous. It's just, there's something called the soft bigotry of low expectations. And we have to stop that. We've got to stop looking at people and saying, oh, because you're this, you're unable to do this. This is the United States of America. And here I'm going to raise my flag and say, look, this is the thing. The whole point of this country, of this great experiment of the United States, is that you could do anything and be anything, regardless of race, sexual orientation, socioeconomic circumstances. And we have gotten so far away from that. We have bizarrely started putting people in little groups and little boxes. And then that's where it becomes political. We have got to break out of that. And I think if we do it, when we talk about crime and safety and policing, that I think it would bleed into other areas in a positive way.
I think you're absolutely right. I mean, and I've said it, and obviously there's some national radio hosts that I listen to say it all the time, but we have to get back to our unum, our e pluribus unum. We have to get back to being one. And I couldn't agree with that more. What do you, with someone with such an impressive resume and so many years in law enforcement, what do you see in the future? Like, what is your crystal ball, if you would? We're both Christians, so we don't use crystal balls, but nonetheless, if you were to see the future, what would it look like?
I think we're going to have some more tough times coming up. I don't know how else to say that. And I just have to say, as a Christian, last weekend, my husband walked into church and we both kind of looked and we're like, God's got to be splitting the firewood right now. I just get ready to burn the whole thing down. So I say that, but so I do think we're going to have some tough times coming up. And when I say that, I mean, from a law enforcement perspective, I think that this crime trend that we're on is going to continue in certain areas. And that frustrates me as an American, because crime and safety, it shouldn't be political. It also shouldn't be regional. Your safety shouldn't be regional. But I think what's going to happen is that the people who can leave cities like Chicago and Seattle and Portland and New York City and Pittsburgh, the people who are able are going to leave, and who's going to be left there? People without the means to be able to leave. And they're the ones who are going to have to deal with this crime surge. And I think ultimately those are going to be the people that are going to save themselves and save the country. But I think it's going to have to get even worse before it gets better.
What is next for you and your mission?
So with the National Police Association, we are going to continue. We are going to broaden our scope when it comes to talking about local and national issues. One of the things that we've started to do is to get on, do more regional talk radio, because talk radio, again, being totally apolitical. And I've spoken to talk radio personalities, on the left, on the right, in the middle. And but talk radio is where you can really discuss ideas. When you're doing a television hit, a cable news hit, or even a network television hit, you've got a really limited amount of time. and so we're really branching out more into radio, and where we can talk to people for 10 or 15 minutes. And of course, we've got our NPA report, where we're going to continue to go out there and find just wonderful guests. We are filing amicus briefs too on all kinds of different cases. We still have a FOIA request out there with the Border Patrol whipping case. If you'll recall, where now we know that Mr. Mayorkas knew that those weren't whips, and yet he allowed the president to go on live national television and say someone will pay. We have FOIA requests out there. We are not going to stop till we get to the bottom of cases like that, where American law enforcement has been lied about, has been wronged, has been maligned, and we're not going to stop till we get the truth out there.
I love that. And are they just stonewalling on those FOIA requests so far?
Yes, they are. But we're not going to give up. And you're going to see Mr. Mayorkas have to come and testify before the legislature. And
Yes.
And so hopefully that's the thing. Our legal team is tenacious, and they have the right heart, because they have the heart for not just American law enforcement officers, but they have the heart for the American public. And that's the difference with the National Police Association, because it's not just about taking care of cops. We want to take care of the people that deserve protection from American law enforcement.
Yes. And you can't have good law enforcement without the community. It is a relationship that has to be together. Otherwise,
people are the police, and the
work.
police are the people. It goes back to Robert Beale, right?
Exactly. My last question for you, and this is a question I ask everyone who comes on the show, and we've touched on so many things that probably qualify as answers for it, but what is the one takeaway, the one thing that law enforcement officers can do that's going to make a difference in their personal lives?
That's huge. I would say the one thing that every law enforcement officer in the country should do is to get involved, whatever your religious beliefs are. Get involved in some sort of spiritual, religious, whether it's program, whatever, whether you're Christian, Muslim, Jewish, whatever it is. Understand that there is something bigger than you out there. And frankly, it's essential to your officer's survival, that belief system. Embrace that belief system in something bigger than you, whatever that is, and move forward with that in your life. You will find so much peace, so much joy, and so much more meaning in your life, because it's really easy to become and stay cynical in this job. But if you understand there's a greater good out there, a greater presence, a greater being, something bigger than you, it will bring you so much peace and joy.
I couldn't agree with you more. As one who talks about spiritual wellness all the time, I couldn't agree any more with that answer. What is the best way for people to connect with you?
So if you want to learn more about the National Police Association, you can visit us at nationalpolice.org. Don't Google us. You'll come up with all kinds of hate. So go to nationalpolice.org. My website is femaleforces.com or bucksavage.com. Follow me on Twitter. You will see the political side of Sergeant Betsy Smith. It's SGT Betsy Smith. And we have some fun. It's a pretty raucous place. But go to nationalpolice.org, read our articles, see our show, go to our YouTube page, and see some of the shows that we do. We just talk to amazing people in and out of this profession.
Wonderful. I will link all that up, and it is a great YouTube channel, and I do like the Twitter posts. So, Betsy, thank you so much for coming on. It's been a true pleasure to meet you and have this hour to sit and talk with you.
Thanks so much for having me. This was a fun discussion.
Thank you. So how was that? Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Remember, this is always on YouTube and Rumble. And then I do take the morning roll calls and I put those on X as well, where you can follow and watch the complete episodes on there. So thank you for watching or listening. I hope you enjoyed it. Every episode, full show notes and everything about it, whatever streaming service you're watching this on, if you just go down to ontheblueline.com and then you'll see the /show notes. Click on that link. It'll take you to the show notes for that episode. And on there, you'll have access to really more than you could ever consume. Well, that might not be completely true, but it's a lot. And there's a lot of links, and everything we discussed is on there. And you can follow those links and go as deep into that rabbit hole as you desire. So thank you so much for coming back week after week. I have a new episode for you again next week. That is all for today. Don't forget, I'm going to see you next Monday in Morning Roll Call. I will see you next Thursday in the interview room. But in the meantime, and as always, I'll see you out there on the Blue Line.